Well, councillors, executive team members, council staff, our two presenters for today, and also Sam from the Gunnedah Times, welcome to our March ordinary meeting for the Gunnedah Shire Council for 2022. I'd like to declare the meeting open at 4:30, and I'd like to start by acknowledging the Kamilaroi people as the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather, and pay my respects to elders both past and present, and extend that message to any Indigenous community members who might be either in this room or listening to us online. Next, I'd like to ask if we could please all be upstanding for prayer. Eternal God, our loving Father, we come to Thee this day in the name of Jesus Christ, who is the lover of our souls and the Saviour of all mankind. May we feel His love and respond to it. May His Spirit shine in lives that are darkened by worry, doubt, or fear. Strengthen and guide those who are trying to do what is right. Make it plain to them. Make us more mindful of the needs of our fellow men and less absorbed in selfish concerns, that Christ may approve and bless what we do here this day. We ask these blessings in His name. Amen. Please be seated. Councillors, we mourn the loss of community members that have passed between the 17th of February, being the last council meeting that was held, and the 16th of March. So we mourn the loss of Norman Kingsford Cyphers, John Douglas Ashworth, Wendy Christine Roots, Elva Margaret Cameron, Michael James Leslie, Margaret Mary Demestra Allen, Mavis Magdalene Jones, Peter David Kelly, Kevin William George Court, and Leslie Edward Jones. Councillors, council team and friends in the gallery, if I could please ask if you'd be upstanding and join with me in 1 minute's silence to pay respect to the deceased as we extend our condolences to the family and friends of the deceased. Thank you. Please be seated. Councillors, looking at our next item on the agenda, which is those present and apologies. I note we have all of the elected members in the room and are present. For our executive management, the General Manager, Mr. Groth, has requested leave, or is absent, I should say, and all other members are with us for our ordinary meeting of council. So we'll move on to the next item, which is confirmation of previous minutes, and that is for the ordinary meeting that was held on the 16th of February. I'll call for an elected member to move. So thank you, Councillor Moses, and seconded by Councillor MacArthur. I'll call for any elected member who'd like to ask a question in relation to the minutes from the previous meeting. And no questions, then I'll put that motion. All in favour? Against? Declare the motion carried. Next item is declarations of interest. So I'll call for any declarations of interest in relation to our ordinary meeting for March. I'll call a second time for any declarations of interest. Third and final call. Moving right along. Next on the agenda, we have community presentations. We're fortunate to have two today. They are both in relation to the same item, which is 11.2 in your business paper, which is membership of the mining and energy related councils. I believe our first speaker will be Mr. Greg Lamont, Executive Officer for the Association of Mining Related Councils. And I'd now like to call Mr. Lamont forward, if you could please address Council. Councillors, as you're aware, our speakers have an opportunity, if there is an item on the agenda they wish to speak to, will be for 5 minutes. At the conclusion of the speech, there'll be an opportunity if you need clarification for any item that was discussed during the speech. So now, councillors, if I could please ask for your respect as we have our presentation from Mr. Lamont. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you very much for the opportunity, councillors, to speak to you today. I have a limited time, and so what I've done is provided a information sheet for you, which has got a lot more detail than what I'm going to talk about. Gunnedah Shire Council over the years, Mr. Mayor, and every one of the councillors may well know, has been a leading member of our association. Councillor Hasler may know, or Councillor Fuller in particular, for at least 20 years or more. And last year held quarterly meetings we had in July and again in October, when it was difficult for us to get face-to-face meetings. Councillor Hook was the leading light in helping us with that, with former Councillor Hasler. And the delegates, when they come to Gunnedah, have always appreciated the courtesy that's been shown to them, particularly because of Council's long-term involvement in mining and energy-related matters. And energy is something that's come onto the agenda in later years, and our association has adjusted to fit in with that for the affected councils that are our members and the community within them. Your council has been one of the main drivers of our association over the years. And when you talk about councils like Tony Jones, and I think he went on to go and work for some of the mining people, Noel O'Brien, Hans Algaya, Owen Hasler as a former councillor, and then you had delegates in Councillor Hook and Colleen Fuller as a former chair of the association, and there's life members among those people. So if I missed any, my apologies to former councillors of Gunnedah Shire. The council has played a significant role, and the General Manager's not here at the moment, but when I first met the association people over in Coonabarabran some years ago, it was very clear that they needed some admin and finance support, and Gunnedah provided that as well, Mr. Chair. The main achievements on that fact sheet, two critical things. One has been the voluntary planning agreement guidelines and framework that we developed in concert with the Minerals Council and the state government, and that's available for any members to utilise. And the other has been our involvement in the resources for regions, where the state government had several goes at improving the criteria, and the many issues there, they probably still have a way to go, but we are active in working with that, and we'll be doing more work with them in the future going forward. So why should your council remain a member, Mr. Mayor? Well, your vision statement and your mission statement, which sets the scene as what you're all about with your community and your community direction, or what you're going to do for them. I'm a ratepayer in your shire, and I've been impressed with how this council has dealt with this mix of mining, renewable energy, agriculture, service industry. It's got the right balance, and it's got that because it's been a member of the association in part, but also because of the decisions of the council over the years. Now, this is what our association is all about. We're an advocate on behalf of our members to the state government, and we support the communities that have mining and energy related activities in them. The current state planning significant process, I feel bad with my back to you, my friend. The state significant planning process doesn't ensure that the community gets looked after in a way that we'd always like necessarily in the community, and councils don't have the ultimate power to influence that. As an association, we have delegates that are passionate about their communities from all backgrounds and interests to ensure that mining and energy production in their council areas are managed in a sensible way that Gunnedah does, where they have that balance right. And they do that really well. And I'm not saying that to patronise, I'm saying that because I'm being a resident of this community and I'm a ratepayer. Now, the strength of our association are our delegates. And here's where there's an opportunity, where the delegates come together and meet and share ideas and talk. And like other entities, they bring back those ideas and report to you, and they're better helping their community because they've been alerted to something that works in some place or could work in this organisation, etc. And any association is only good as its delegates. They drive the association. I'm just the executive officer to put in place what they need me to do. And your delegates, any delegates, have the opportunity to get us to do things for them if it fits in with our constitutional objectives. So being part of the association, I believe, is an opportunity for delegates to broaden their horizon. They can meet ministers, they can meet opposition leaders, they can meet senior bureaucrats, they can ask questions in a way that they may not otherwise get if they didn't become a delegate and went outside the LGA, or they're not involved, that some of the other councillors have been here for a while are. Our meetings are held quarterly, 2 in Sydney and 2 in the regions, and we've had some issues with COVID, but Gunnedah helped us considerably last year. There's an opportunity here for Gunnedah to lead. Gunnedah has always been the leader in the mining sector and energy lately for a long time, as far as I can remember, and has witnessed a downturn in mining in the 90s and a downturn in their sale yards, but now there's got a growth in energy and mining. So you've got a lot to offer, and your delegates would have a lot to offer to assist other delegates from other like councils. We are Western councils, we're not a mining entity in the city. So we have a lot of common interests. And as a body, we're apolitical. We don't have an agenda with politics, and we have a mixture of different backgrounds of our delegates. As like the rest of New South Wales, we have a new council, you've got a new council, and with that comes new ideas, new delegates, a new focus. These ideas can be nurtured, and with the new councillors being exposed to many opportunities that are out there, it's a positive approach to what you can do when you're a delegate and bring that back to the community. Now, Henry Ford, he said, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you always got. Our association has shown that we have adapted to change and the needs. Where we started with coal mining, then metalliferous, and then now renewable energy, and we are working on that. So councillors, as you know, need to be informed, Mr Mayor, and our association provides that vehicle for you, other than what you might receive through your council and your other connections. And for this purpose, we have a meeting in Orange on Friday, and we have the Electric Vehicle Council coming. We've got government senior bureaucrats talking about the hydrogen hub and what that all means. I'm a delegate in the RES, and so we bring that information back to our delegates. So, Mr Mayor, in conclusion, with my limited time, and I'm rushing through as quick as I can so I don't interfere with that decision you have to make to finish me up, I would like to encourage your council to consider retaining your membership of our association, and perhaps point delegates that may be interested with a passion and interest in sustainable mining and energy. And that's how you as a council and they as councillors can better serve their community. In this way, the delegates, by being part of another external body, have a better chance of being informed in this changing world, and by having a seat at the table of our association, they can make their own mind up democratically. They can report back as to whether or not you should be delegates and whether you should retain, and that's a fresh approach to the way you go forward here, Mr Mayor. After all, you are democratically elected, and you're elected by the community to look after them. In conclusion, Mr Mayor, I would just like to say on behalf of the association, whatever decision you make, that we as an association value the contribution the Gunnedah Shire Council has made over the years, and personally I would like to see you remain in the association, but personally thank you for the delegates that have been involved, and I look forward to a favourable decision, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Lamont. Now I'll call on elected members if you'd like to ask a question or have clarification of any of the content.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and Through you. Thank you, Greg, for your presentation. And I'm new to council, so I don't know too much about the mining and energy-related councils of New South Wales. The first of your achievements that you specified here is in the past tense, so was represented on the New South Wales Government's Resources for Regions Assessment Panel. Is that not something?
Yeah, that was myself. That was before. That was the precursor to the current system where they've 24 councils participate in. They automatically get the money every year, providing they meet that criteria when they apply for Resources for Regions. It's a distribution of royalties. Before that, it was an independent panel that was set up, and our association sat on that. And then that grew into us being involved with the former leader of the National Party, Mr. Barilaro, getting us involved in assessing the proposed criteria. We had workshops in Sydney, and what has eventuated, we would have liked to have seen all councils affected by mining receiving part of that money, but the government made a decision to only allocate it to 24. But what they did do, each year they used to allocate 50 million, and it never ever got taken up. And our argument was, the chair of our panel was Roger Fletcher from Dubbo, who's an independent chair, and we had the state government treasury there and people to make sure we were doing it correctly and within the law of arm's length. And so that wasn't very happy to a lot of people. A lot of people in our community weren't very happy with that approach, so they changed it. And the last year that round might have been around 28 million only out of the 50 got distributed, and we as a body pushed for that money to be rolled back over again, and it ended up being now $75 million. So that gives the government and the communities affected by mining an opportunity to have a better piece of the cake, and that's one of the intangible benefits that you know, people that aren't involved in the association don't always see.
Are there any further questions? Councillor McGrath.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hi, Greg. Thanks so much for coming along today. I'm just a little bit curious. You mentioned in the advantages of being a member that you liaise with the Commonwealth Research Centre for Transformation of Mining Economies, and also talk about the research agencies and assistance to prepare submissions. So if we wanted to investigate, you know, obviously a goal that we all have is diversifying our economy. So if we wanted to investigate a particular avenue, say, for example, nuclear energy, is that something where instead of us just having to absorb that cost, we could ask you to kind of share that across the network?
Yeah, if your delegates brought something like that to our association, we would pursue that. The CRC is for life after mining, been established in WA, and they're always looking for projects like this. Then we've got the Arana Opportunity Network is working with the University of New South Wales. Now, both these entities approached us so they could have access to our delegates and our LGAs, and it's not something that we push for. Why the Commonwealth Research Centre for time that you see there over in WA, they wanted an eastern entity that represented local government. Because we're a specific entity, we're not large doing the good work the local government New South Wales does or country mayors, where we just concentrate on our own backyard where mining and energy things are. So there's plenty of opportunities there if we're approached, for sure.
Cool, thank you so much.
Any further questions, councillors?
Just one.
Councillor Fuller.
Thank you, Greg, for your presentation. Subsidence boards, where do they sit now? Are they still with you in the mining related councils?
No, the mine subsidence changed, become advisory New South Wales or something several years ago. At the conference last week in Sydney, the special conference, Local Government New South Wales, one of our members, Wallandilly Shire Council, raised that as an issue. Where are we up to with mine subsidence? Because when they changed from the old days over into the new advisory services, whatever they call the name, it's a bit hard to keep up with the names when you're dealing with government. But that they had a big a pool of funds for about 20 million to be distributed to fix properties that had fallen, houses had fallen down through the holes. But I haven't heard a lot of comment about that until I saw the Wallandilly situation. But we did have a councillor on that board who sat there, and then they removed that person and they allowed us to have an observer there. Then it's just closed shop.
Any further questions? Thank you, Mr. Lamont. I appreciate your time coming to Gunnedah and as the Executive Officer of the organisation addressing Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Now our next speaker is somebody that we're all quite familiar with, Mr. Owen Hasler, former councillor and long-serving councillor of the Gunnedah Shire Council. It's the exact same item, 11.2, and I'll now hand over for 5 minutes. He is known as Mr. Brevity, so I'm sure he'll stick to 5 minutes. And as you're all aware, there'll be an opportunity for questions or clarifications once complete. Thank you, Mr. Hasler.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Council. May I say for the first time, congratulations to you all. I haven't seen any of you, I don't think, since the election, or one or two. But may the next 2.5 years be a very productive one for you and for our community. Yes, brevity is my second name, and hence, instead of big lots of notes like Mr. Lamont, I've got very small notes here, and hopefully I won't be too repetitive of some of the things he said. But just in terms of historically, yes, in the 90s we determined to go into what was then called the Association of Mining Related Councils, the AMRC. Later we changed it to MERC when we expanded into the wind power and turbines and solar energy, etc. So, and of course, as Mr. Lamont alluded to, we had early councillors were councillors like Councillor Noel O'Brien. Tony Jones, of course, was a former Director of Infrastructure, Director of Environment and Planning. Yeah, finally got it out. Yes, before he became a councillor and was the chairman for a number of years, and was, I think, it's co-delegate with Councillor Fuller at the time, and then Councillor Fuller succeeded him. The other one was very strong supporter of the program was Councillor Hans Orgo, who I was a co-delegate with in the 9 years ago, for about 3 years until he unfortunately departed. And we hosted the MERC in those days, and of course we hosted it again in May last year. And that, I think that's, and I'll come to that in a minute, I think that's one of the important aspects of being a member as well. It's the networking, it's what you learn by going to the regional meetings. What we have is usually the 4 meetings a year have been utilised, 2 in the city, which allow us to have the departmental officials and particularly pollies who find it a bit more difficult to get out to the regional meetings. But if we have those meetings in Sydney twice a year, that allowed us greater access to the Sydney offices or Department of Planning, etc., and also for the pollies to attend. The rural meetings, in regional meetings, of course, when we started, principally it was mining, and therefore Wollongong, Singleton, Wallandilly, Gunnedah, all coal mining communities were linked to places like Broken Hill with heavy metals, and later on board they came on board Parks, Orange and Bland, which is West Wyalong, where they have Lake Cowell. They're all gold mining communities. So and so there was that commonality through mining. And when we have those meetings in those areas, we usually organise on the first day tours of the mines, and we look at what's happening in their community. So it's a learning process and a networking as much as advocacy in that particular role. So there's very much a joint role for the organisation. In terms of, let's see, oh yes, one of my first meetings, of course, was at Wollongong, and I was approached as the mayor at the time by the firm which was preceded Civica, who wanted to set up those accommodation villages in our shire. Conversation with other delegates and that reinforced the view that having those was not a positive for communities, and that council of the time took a strong view against that. We wanted people to live and work in our community, have their accommodation locally, not be just here staying briefly and travelling forth and back. So those sorts of things I found very useful, to hear what the others had to say and what their experience was in those situations. Completely different if you're in isolated northern parts of Australia. We don't see Gunnedah as being that isolated. So the achievements, I think Greg once again alluded to a few things. 3 years of negotiations between the Minerals Council and our organisation. I had the privilege of being on that negotiating team. We came up at the end of the process with a framework, including timeframes, road contributions methodology, a non-roads contribution methodology based on social impact assessment, population change, and impacts on local infrastructure and the capacity of the existing infrastructure to handle the increase in population. That was accepted and supported by the Department of Planning and Environment and went up on their website at the end of the process. A fairly long process, but a practical outcome. Secondly, the Resources Advisory Forum. A lot of communities had issues about the process that went through the approval process for mine developments, and so the government had a review, I think it's in about 17-18, and we were invited, that is, Merck was invited to have a delegate, which I was honoured to be appointed, and we made it clear to that Resources Advisory Forum and the department officials who were represented on it, that we wanted to have an increase in the thoroughness of the process, the impartiality of the process, and thirdly, and most importantly, the transparency of the process, so that the community would have confidence that what their view had been taken into account in going through the planning process. And we were very pleased that that was supported by the Lisa Corbin report, and we saw, which pointed out a greater need for the comprehensive analysis of both the positive and negative impacts of mining developments. So we're there to promote the best interests of our communities, not one particular, we're not anti-mining, we're not pro-mining in that sense. We're pro-development, which has positive impacts on our community, but where it is identified as having negative, we need to have some compensatory effects put into place. Thirdly, the other one that I saw as fairly important, this is just recent achievements, is the Resources Advisory, for regions. We participated in a number of meetings. I mean, I was very disappointed when I was the mayor at the beginning of the end of 2012, to find that we weren't included in the VPAs for Maules Creek and Narrabri Coal. You know, yet we were fairly obviously going to be impacted, not having the mine on site in terms of our LGA, but the impacts there. Some would be very positive impacts, but there would be also negative impacts, and we weren't given the opportunity to be part of that VPA. Resources, and we didn't receive any resources for regions funding in the first 2, if not 3 rounds. And we took up that issue strongly as a council, but also most importantly through the Merck. And in the later years we had several meetings with both pollies and departmental officials over it. And as Mr Lamont pointed out, we now had an increase in the funds available for that program and a limitation on which councils were able to achieve those fundings.
Mr Haslett, with the greatest respect, you've been 7 minutes. If you could wind it up, please. Thanks.
I'll wind up then by saying we have 5 active mines in this close proximity to Gunnedah, not within our LGA, but obviously you all know that there is an impact, once again, positive and negative, and therefore I believe, as I think many in the community believe, it's important for us to be part of an organisation which focuses on advocacy for the communities and also a learning process by being part of a network which will educate you and your fellow delegates and fellow councillors, hopefully, as you go forward. Thanks very much for the opportunity, and I'm sorry that my book was bigger than I thought.
Thank you, Mr Hasler. And if you wouldn't mind just waiting, and we'll just check if there are any questions for you first. Councillors, any questions for Mr Hasler?
Sorry, I was going to give someone else a chance there. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Oh, and if you don't mind, both you and Greg have been quite clear in terms of historically where being part of the mining and energy related councils has been really beneficial. I was just wondering if perhaps you could succinctly tell us what the benefits might be moving forward and into the future. Like, for example, is there scope to do a VPA type arrangement with renewables? Like, is that the kind of thing that's being looked at, or what's the next step?
Well, at our last couple of meetings, we have invited and had renewables advocates and practitioners, like the one from Manila, which is, was creating a solar farm here in Gunnedah. They have been, welcome visitors. As I say, we invite ministers regularly when there are issues pertaining to them which are of interest to our members. So I think the fact that we're regularly meeting and we're regularly discussing these issues and getting input from practitioners. These aren't theoreticians, they're practitioners. They're communities which have had experience or are having experience, continued or new, with the whole range of these, both renewables and more traditional types of mining activity. And I have to say, in my 24 years as a councillor, probably this organisation was one of the most informative and, to me, productive in terms of outcomes for our council and for the other member councils. So otherwise I wouldn't be here today, I guess, sort of encouraging you and the other councillors to remain members.
Thank you so much, and it's always lovely to see you, Owen.
Thank you, Councillor. Thanks for
Any further questions, councillors? Thank you, Mr Hasler. Moving right along, councillors, item 8 is in relation to Merrill Minute. There are no Merrill Minutes. I'm sure you're all very happy to hear, so we'll move on to the next item, which is the Acting General Manager's reports. Mr Bartlett is the Acting General Manager today, so he will be taking us through the recommendations, starting with item 9.1, the 2022 National General Assembly of Local Government Conference motions. Thank you, Mr Bartlett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and through you. The purpose of this report is for Council to consider proposed motions for the 2022 National General Assembly Conference and determine those it wishes to submit to the Assembly. At the time of writing this report, one proposed motion had been received, which is detailed in the report. Council may wish to consider any other motions arising from the floor before determining those to be submitted to the Assembly.
Thank you, Mr Bartlett. I call for elected councillor.
Mr Mayor, in light of the fact that we do have one motion, and I know that there's another 3 that have actually been submitted, and to give councillors the opportunity of being able to discuss thoroughly, I recommend that we move into committee as a whole.
Do I have a seconder for the recommendation? Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll put that motion. All in favour? Against? Declare the motion carried. So, Councillor Hook, would you like to lead off?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and if I can have the indulgence of councillors, and I'll start off with the motion that I have put forward, which is that the Australian Local Government Association call on the federal government to open a national debate on nuclear energy as a viable option in the production of baseload electricity following the decommissioning of coal-fired power stations throughout Australia.
Would you like to talk to that motion, Councillor Hook, before we progress any further?
Mr Mayor, would it be appropriate that I get a seconder to that motion before I talk to it?
We're in committee of the whole, so we'll actually come out. When we come out of committee of the whole, we'll actually look to endorse all motions.
Councillors, I think it's becoming obvious that there's some debate in the community about the viability of alternate energy to be able to provide consistent baseload power. And There are a number of alternatives that are coming forward. Certainly hydrogen energy production is one, but I think it's a long way off. I do believe that the technology today is way, way ahead of where it was when the likes of Chernobyl was actually made. And I do believe that we have got huge natural resources here with uranium, and we have a great opportunity in this country to be able to produce good quality baseload power well into the future without really needing to have huge networks of electricity conduction facilities. We do know that at this particular point, you get a regional energy zone way out west, and you have to build large infrastructure to carry that energy back into the areas where it's needed. If you were to convert somewhere like Liddell as having a nuclear power plant in it, then there is the opportunity to be able to use the existing network without having to spend a whole lot of extra money. That's only part of the question. I think there's defence comes into it as well. We're moving into a nuclear age with our submarines sometime in the future. We're going to need certainly some serious discussion around nuclear energy in other fields. All that I'm really saying is that we really need to open the debate for the discussion, those for and those against. I don't really understand the full implications of what actually will happen if we have nuclear energy, whether it is viable, whether it is feasible or not. But there are many other countries in the world that are embracing it, and I think that we'd be silly in this country if we didn't at least open the discussion nationally to determine whether it is something that this nation wants to move forward on.
So, councillors, we're in committee of the whole, so our normal 2 for, 2 against type motion, as far as speaking, really isn't relevant in committee of the whole. So if you'd like to speak, now's the time. When we come out of committee of the whole and back into our standing orders, well, then we'll move back into the debate for and against with these motions. But is there an elected member who'd like to speak on this particular motion? No? Councillor Luke?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and Councillor Hook. The motion talks about opening a national debate on nuclear energy. Now, I think there's always a national debate on nuclear energy. I wondered if there's something more specific that could be in that motion that talks more on undertaking a risk analysis or something like that rather than a national debate, because the media is doing that every day. It's there.
Well, yeah, that's it. Look, it's a good point, and it's something that another councillor pointed out to me. But I was really thinking we just keep it extremely general. It gives the government wriggle room. I don't know that the debate is on the national agenda. You know, it's muttered about in back rooms. It's hardly in the media front and centre, but I think it should be. And whether you can make that wording a little stronger without committing the government to a time frame or anything like that, I think yeah, I'm open to see it being modified.
Can I offer a suggestion? Ms. Markey, do you want to copy and paste item 1 so you don't cut the original? You have a play with my suggestion. Oh. If you highlight the words "to open a national debate on" and then replace with "to remove all restrictions preventing the development of." Right, so that will certainly open a debate. It doesn't give them a time frame to go and or you know a kick to go and build a power station or anything else. But at the moment, you know, I guess baseload power is generated by private companies in Australia as we stand, and at the moment, no one can pitch or propose a development of nuclear power of any form, because that's prohibited in Australia. So if we want people to seriously spend the cash, particularly a private company, so obviously there's a government agency that's spent the cash and got the research and development sitting there, and I'm sure as a council we could get anyway, I'm trying to think of their acronym, but to come and, Cole probably knows it, come and talk to us about nuclear energy. The point I'm saying is, at the moment, it's shadow boxing. It's not a debate because it's not something that's achievable in Australia. That would be my suggestion.
Can I just ask Councillor Hook of the original wording of the motion? Are you happy to accept the new
Delighted, Mr Mayor, delighted.
motion? Okay, so that...
Sorry, I just think that the rest of it after nuclear energy should just be a full stop. Of course, we don't need to actually, you can't say to remove all restrictions preventing the development of nuclear energy as a viable option, and it just needs to be restrictions preventing the development of nuclear energy to provide baseload electricity. Yeah. Because the rest of it is...
No issue from me.
Councillor Hook? Miss Markey, if you can put a full stop there now.
I would actually speak against that. I think that in the original motion, Councillor Hook has made the national debate linked to the viable option for the production of baseload electricity. I do have a bit of an issue with remove all restrictions, because Australia, I'm sure, is a signatory to the international safety guidelines that the Atomic Energy Agency run. I mean, I would like to see this resolution passed and put up to the federal government to act on, not give them reasons to not act, if you can see where I'm coming from. So remove all possible restrictions, or restrictions that are contrary to what our obligations might be under international law.
Just remove restrictions.
Point noted and agreed with Councillor MacArthur. I would suggest the key word is the preventing the development of nuclear energy, not you don't remove any restrictions preventing the development and sale of nuclear weapons. Sorry, the point I'm making is I understand exactly what you're saying. I guess my read is, well, yeah, it's to remove the restrictions that prevent the development of nuclear energy.
I just think the amended resolution goes much further in intent than what Councillor Hook intended. And I think too, when you say the development of nuclear energy, it could indeed be for weapons of mass destruction and not just baseload electricity. So I'd like to see a measured resolution put forward, and so I would support the original one.
Councillor Luke, did you want to speak, or your microphone's just left on?
No, I'll let the debate go on further, I think. Oh, beg your pardon. Is that why you're asking?
Councillor Hoddle.
Mr Chairman, I'd have to say that the amendment to it would get thrown out straight away. I mean, most Australians don't agree with nuclear energy, I don't think anyway. Someone suggested they put a nuclear plant at Singleton. Well, let's tell the people of Singleton that idea. I don't think it'd be very popular. So I think the original one is just to have a look at it and keep the debate going, and that's probably where it should be. The second one would never get off base.
Councillor McGrath.
Yeah, I'm a little bit inclined to agree with Juliana. I understand Murray's point about that being a much stronger statement that's going to accomplish Councillor Hook's goal of having a debate. However, I do think it's important, particularly in this environment, to actually say what you mean, and that is not what we actually mean. And certainly I think Councillor Hoddle was correct that that goes significantly further than the original statement intended. So I would agree to go back to the original one.
Mr Mayor, I'd be much more comfortable if you go to the amendment there. If you remove all out of it, and reinstate as a viable option, etc., right through, because it is there to qualify what we're trying to achieve. And we are trying to, using nuclear energy as a baseload power source. And it focuses the debate in that area rather than spreading it out into other fields, which may include nuclear capabilities for other purposes. So, you know, I congratulate Councillor O'Keefe for bringing in to remove restrictions, and also Councillor MacArthur for pointing out that all is probably not a good option, but I think this might sort of cover all bases and keep most people happy.
Thank you, Councillor Hook. Remember, councillors, when we come out of committee, the whole will actually be then debating these motions. So you have some time to consider whether you are willing to support this one or not. It could still be an amendment when we come out. I'd now like to move on to the next three items that are listed, and I'd like to clarify that these motions were endorsed at the last Nemoy Unlimited board meeting that was held earlier this month. The board didn't realise at that point in time that they would not be able to submit the motions because they're not members of the association, but any council that is a member of Nemoy Unlimited would be able to put these motions forward. So, councillors, as the chair of Nemoy Unlimited, I'd like to present these three motions that were endorsed by the mayors on behalf of their councils to go to conference. So just quickly, I'll run through these motions and then I'll ask for any clarification or debate should there be any. So the first one, that council calls on the Commonwealth Government to, I'll read from my notes, the Commonwealth Government to conduct a review into the Local Government Financial Assistance Grant Act 1995 and the base on which grant funding for roads is allocated, to create a more equitable approach to allocations and one that recognises the infrastructure managed by local government in the rural, regional and remote areas of New South Wales. Now, the reason for this motion to be put forward is actually in correspondence with our federal member, the Honourable Mark Colton, who was the minister at one stage for local government. And since the Act was first enacted by the federal government, it was originally, the intent was to allocate funds to rural and regional councils that have a very limited rate base, but yet have mostly, when it comes to roads, a very significant both sealed and unsealed network as one of the components. For this actual fund that is administered or is put forward by the Commonwealth Government to local government, there's a percentage of that of 30% that's actually the calculation that's allocated to population. Now, since the Act was first put forward, the exponential growth of metropolitan areas and the loss of population in regional areas means it's now disproportionate, and it's time for a review of that legislation to see, or what the motion is asking for is to see a more equitable distribution of those funds back into rural and regional areas. So I might hold up there. Are there any debate or questions in relation to that motion? The next motion is...
And can I butt in there quickly, please, Mr Mayor? So this is what we put forward to the national... So it should be that the association calls on the Commonwealth government all of these, because it's not council, it's that the association. So that is what we hope that they will adopt.
No, it's actually council, because we're a financial member of the organisation. Nemoy Unlimited is not, so the motion can't go forward from Nemoy Unlimited. It has to be a member council to the conference. So we, as in Gunnedah Council, are actually putting this motion forward.
With respect, Mr Mayor, I think Councillor Luke means that the Australian Local Government Association call on the Commonwealth Government. So she's not talking about the Nemoy Unlimited, she's talking about the Australian Local Government Association. So the wording of the motion to reflect that.
Yeah, that's correct. All three are. So that's actually an edit from the motion. The next one, the motion that was endorsed was that the Australian Local Government Association call on the Commonwealth Government to provide councils with an additional one-off Roads to Recovery grant equal to 50% of the annual funding for the maintenance, repair and renewal of roads because of the prolonged wet and dry conditions on the eastern seaboard. So we know as a community just how much we're struggling, well, I wouldn't say struggling, but the expense and the amount of time it's taken to get our unsealed roads back to a adequate level for our agricultural community. With 3 years of drought, that was quite an expense and a lot of work to maintain that network, and then of course the floods that have absolutely devastated from back in December. So we know we've spent more than $1 million ourselves in the Gunnedah Shire Council, and you take that right across all rural and regional areas. That's one thing that we're all united that we're struggling with that expense. So this actually is not a precedent. It happened in 2019 as well. There were funds from the Commonwealth for 50% that were actually granted. So that's another call for that, an addition for that extra funds. Any question in relation to that? The third motion was that Australian Local Government Association calls on the Commonwealth Government to commence a mature and informed discussion inclusive of all relevant Commonwealth guidelines on the use of wastewater for specific purposes other than parks and gardens, and including road maintenance activities undertaken by local government. We have many members in the Nemoy Unlimited area that are on water restrictions, some almost permanently, like Tamworth, are on water restrictions, and it just seems crazy that potable water is used to maintain gravel roads or in any road network when there's a fantastic opportunity to use recycled water for that purpose as well as other purposes. So at the moment, the state government, Nemoy Unlimited, did some work last year trying to do some pilot programs in both Walker and Tamworth for the reuse of this water, and it wasn't allowed by the state government based on Commonwealth regulations. So this motion is really put forward requesting the Commonwealth to review their guidelines to enable wastewater. And look, we're coming every day closer to the next drought, so that's the purpose for that motion. Any questions? Right. Well, I might now call an elected member.
Excuse me.
Move that way.
If you can rescind that procedural motion, I'd really
I didn't
like.
quite get it out, so continue on.
Okay, I'd really like to submit a fifth motion while we're in committee of a whole, and it's not up to my usual standard of grammar and spelling, so I'm happy to accept help. My apologies, Donna. I'll talk slowly. That the Australian Local Government Association call on the Commonwealth Government to delay any cut or suspension of the current fuel excise tax arrangements until such time as a genuine reform package can be legislated to replace the tax with a mechanism which distributes this vital road maintenance funding across all road users, regardless of fuel source. Or fuel type is probably better.
Would you like to talk to the motion, please?
Yes. The reason it's a late submission motion is because, I guess it's something that doesn't sit in everyone's front of mind. Everyone at the moment, the price of fuel's gone up. Suddenly the national debate on fuel excise tax has moved much faster than the national debate on nuclear energy. And there's people in the media calling regularly at the moment for a cut or suspension or temporary levy. If you read the motions above, Mr Mayor, you'll notice they're virtually all related to funding of roads and road maintenance. And of course, we as a regional or rural council bear a disproportionate need to fund and rely on road maintenance. If the government cuts the fuel excise tax or eliminates it or temporarily suspends it, it's very, very hard for any government to ever reintroduce or increase a tax. Once it's gone, there's recent history of this very tax becoming difficult to reintroduce. In Australia, it directly funds road maintenance. So if it goes, it won't come back. But the way the world's moving less and less road users are actually burning fossil fuels. And there's some, you know, the motion is not seeking to debate that. That's a positive. That there's nothing wrong with that. But it will become a negative heavily for the funding of road maintenance if suddenly the main mechanism for collecting funds off road users to maintain roads is no longer linked to the dominant way that road users fuel their vehicles. And I think it's an excellent opportunity for genuine tax reform that removes a blanket sales tax on fuel but replaces the revenue stream with something more equitable across people using roads.
Councillor MacArthur.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and with Council's indulgence, I have a sixth motion relating to rural health.
Just before we have that, I might, it's great you've got a motion, but might just see if there's any debate around the motion 5. I would actually like to just add my support to that motion, because as a local government entity that has a very large network of local and regional roads, and unsealed as well as sealed, if there are further financial burdens put on us because there is less funds available because that taxation take isn't there to support us, we already have enough pressure, and we see cost shifting from the state government almost on a regular basis. There's something else that they're shifting towards us, and you could see that be a natural progression for it to be up to local government, therefore our residents and ratepayers, to foot the bill. Okay, there's no debate. Councillor MacArthur.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Donna, I'll read this out for you. That the Australian Local Government Association calls on the federal government to provide funding to the states for full-time career medical officer positions.
Sorry, full-time what?
Full-time career medical officers in rural and remote public hospitals. There's actually a designation at what they call MM or Triple M, the Modified Monash Model, areas 4 to 7. So MM 4-7, where local GPs cannot adequately fill VMO vacancies. VMO, visiting medical officer vacancies. Something.
Would you like to speak to that motion, please, Councillor?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As we know, in Gunnedah we have a shortage of GPs, and those GPs are already under considerable stress when they have to fill roles in the public hospital around emergency. They're also already visiting patients in hospital and in aged care. And yet 40% of the state's population resides in rural and remote areas. The Queensland Health has a system of employing career medical officers, and they do that under an existing industrial instrument. It's an attractive package. They can, a intern or registrar going into practice in a hospital can stay there their entire career if they so choose, and we know that there's more and more women going into this area of employment, and it's an attractive package because it offers paid maternity leave amongst other things. We also know that using locums in hospitals at around $3,000 a day and rising is probably unsustainable going into the future, and we need continuity of care for our community. So having full-time career medical officers in our hospitals, and they practice across a whole range of areas from emergency to obstetrics to surgery, amongst other things, would be of huge advantage to us. And Gunnedah Shire sits within that category of 4 to 7, so it basically goes from large rural towns to rural and remote. And the federal government, I think 2019, put roughly $60 billion through the states into medical care. So it's something that I would put forward because I think our community deserves that continuity of care. Thank you.
I'll just ask a question first and then I'll go to Councillor Hoddle. Councillor MacArthur, are you suggesting that this is funds on top of any funding that's already made available to the state governments for health?
That's a question probably with an answer that I can't give, because I can only imagine what the area health services are utilising Commonwealth government funding for in order to pay for locums in hospitals. So I don't have an easy answer to that. One would hope that there would be efficiencies found in replacing locums with CMOs in hospitals, or the career medical officer positions replacing visiting medical officers as well. You know, there could be efficiencies found in that system that would mean the drawdown on public funding would not be overly burdensome.
Councillor Hoddle?
Mr Mayor, could I beg you to have a number 7? Very simple, Australian local government.
Firstly, I'll just see if there's any further debate on 6 before we progress, if that's okay. Any further debate on motion 6? Okay. Thank you. Councillor Hoddle?
Call on the Commonwealth government to extend mobile coverage in rural areas. No, it's very simple. I don't think I have to go any further than that, but it's probably on their agenda already, but we've got to keep reminding them that it's not satisfactory. Thanks.
Councillor Hoddle, I believe there are Commonwealth funding streams around black spot mobile coverage. Would you consider adding to your motion or modifying your motion to have it more specific around allocating maybe more funds to increase mobile coverage?
I don't know the mechanism because it involves the private sector. So, but I don't know how to word this, because I mean the real problems in this area is the road to Tamworth, and you can't be specific as that. But just generally, it needs more. It needs more funding. It might be from the government, it might be from the licensed operators, that they might have to be encouraged to chip in. So,
Councillors, what we need to also consider is when these motions go forward to conference, they need to be debated. I'm your representative. I'll need some wording to actually be able to debate this motion as well. So I'll encourage you, if these are successful in going forward, that the motions need to be submitted by the 25th with the commentary. So you'll have some homework to do.
Can I ask Councillor Hoddle 2 questions? Is the intention to extend I understand it's both these things, but is the specific concerns you're referring to, is that about extending coverage to areas that are not presently covered, or is it about improving the service or coverage in areas that are technically presently covered?
Both, obviously, Councillor O'Keefe. Improve and extend.
So could I suggest, because you've correctly said that, yeah, that there's currently programs underway, but they're not doing enough, so wording something along the lines of the Australian Local Government Association calling the Commonwealth Government to redouble their efforts to both extend mobile coverage and improve the capacity of service in rural and regional Australia.
I'm not sure that you can measure redouble.
No, but you can strongly suggest that you need to do twice as much as you are now, as long as you're not doing nothing.
I have a question too, Mr Mayor. Is it the Commonwealth Government who has the ability to extend the mobile coverage, or is it the private companies that do that? I mean, is it around incentives to get Telstra, to get Optus to erect the towers? I'd just like some clarification around that.
My understanding from the last lot of funding that that was made available under the can't remember exactly the name, they changed them quite regularly, is most of the funding went to commercial entities other than Telstra and Optus, because they've made the choice that they've gone into the markets where they can make their dollars. So there was an announcement of many $1 million made last year from our local federal member to a company called Field Solutions, and they're a private entity that they're actually into this marketplace, and I believe there are many in that marketplace. But that funding, that black spot funding that's available is open to all.
I can assist. The funding primarily pays private operators who the Mayor has correctly said at this stage are no longer what you would consider major telcos because they're choosing not to be involved in the projects, and they're primarily funding companies to build infrastructure and network that any commercial provider can then use in an area that would not necessarily initially be commercially viable to fund the capital infrastructure. Does that make any sense? Once someone else builds the funded infrastructure, it's suddenly commercially viable to offer the service on the infrastructure already there.
Yeah, I think we have to, Mr. Mayor, we have to realise that these telcos operate under a licence granted by the federal government to have so much spectrum on telecommunications, and part of that licence should be that they have coverage for the nation. I mean, South Africa achieved this many years ago, and we still haven't. So I think that the federal government has to redouble their efforts is probably the way to debate this. You know, they're going to have to put the screws on the operators. They've got to cover the entire nation.
Is it more then about ensuring some sort of community or continual service obligation on the licence holders to ensure that they do operate within the terms of the licence, not to oversell their broadband or whatever it might be on those towers? Is that perhaps a better way to target the motion?
Mr. Mayor, yeah, I think the federal government's responsible for communications across Australia, and they grant licences, and they just have to make sure the licensees do what they're told. Tell them what to do. They won't voluntarily do it because there's no money in certain areas.
Hold them to account.
Hold them to account, yeah.
So we have a motion, councillors, motion 7, that reads that the Australian Local Government Association call on the Commonwealth Government to redouble their efforts to both extend and improve mobile coverage in rural areas. Any further debate on that motion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, if you take from here to Coonabarabran, once you get past Malali, you cannot get any coverage at all till 7 k's out of Coonabarabran on a busy highway, and I think it's the same on the Newell Highway. So if there's an accident, all you can get is SOS. You know, you can't ring your boss, you can't ring anyone. And even up the coast last week, even coming home, we had no coverage for 40 and 50 k's at a time on the coach.
Okay, councillors, are there any further motions? If there are no further motions, can I please have an elected member move that we move back into standing orders? Thank you, Councillor Hook, and seconded by Councillor Moses. I'll put that motion. All in favour? Against? Declare the motion carried. Councillors, we now have 7 motions before you, as discussed under Committee of the Whole. I'll now call for an elected member to move that the 7 motions, to move the recommendation. If I could see the recommendation, please. The wording. Recommendation. Do I have a recommendation? We'll start with the recommendation. Can I please call for recommendation for the for these motions to conference?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I move that the Council submit the 7 motions within the report to the National General Assembly of Local Government Conference.
I'll now call for a seconder to that motion, please. We did. Thank you. Seconded by Councillor MacArthur. Councillor Hook, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We've had a lot of discussion in committee as a whole, and I think we've come to a general consensus that the 7 motions that have been put forward by this council should be taken to the National General Assembly for further debate, and I trust that you'll carry the day very well on behalf of Gunnedah Shire Council.
Thank you, Councillor Hook. Do I have an elected member who'd like to speak against this motion or ask a question? I believe the second one, Ms Markey, is the final motion. I'll just have clarity. Councillor Hook, is that the correct motion
Yes,
for number one?
that's correct.
Councillor MacArthur is the second of the motion. Do you wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Before I put the motion, councillors, one last opportunity. Any questions? Councillor Luke.
I'll be your grammar guru here, and the Australian Local Government Association is a singular entity and it uses the word calls with an S, not call.
Thank you. Councillors, if there are no further debate, I'd like to put this motion. All in favour? Aye. Against? Declare the motion carried. We'll now move on to the next item, which is 9.2 investments, and I'll hand back to the Acting General Manager, Mr Bartlett, to detail the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and through you, the purpose of this report is to present a detailed schedule of Council's investments in accordance with Clause 212 of the Local Government Regulation 2021. I'll be pleased for any questions, however we'll need to take them on notice.
Thank you, Mr Bartlett. I'll now call for elected member to move the recommendation to become the motion. Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe, seconded by Councillor Moses. Councillor O'Keefe, as the mover of the motion, do you wish to speak?
Just to congratulate the Acting General Manager for having the longest General Manager's report in the history of my term on Council.
I'll now call for elected member who'd like to ask a question or speak against this motion. Councillor Moses is a seconder to the motion. Do you wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Be the case, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Aye. Against? Declare that motion carried. Thank you, Mr Bartlett, for stepping in as the Acting General Manager for the reports. Next, we'll move on to item 10, which is the Director of Corporate and Community Services reports. I'll call on Mr Foreman to detail his recommendation, starting with item 1, Councillor Superannuation contributions.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and through you, this first report deals with the payment of superannuation to councillors. Pleased to recommend in two parts that pursuant to the Local Government Act, superannuation payments be made to councillors, and that council note that the estimated budget impact of these payments, being $15,000 per annum, have been included in long-term estimates and would be included in the draft operational program and delivery program.
Thank you, Mr Foreman. I'll now call for an elected member to move the recommendation to become the motion. Thank you, Councillor Luke, seconded by Councillor Fuller. Councillor Luke, as the mover of the motion, do you wish to speak?
Only briefly, Mr Mayor, we have discussed this a couple of times in the past, last year, when it was noted that it was being considered by the state government. I do think that there's a strong effort put in by the people in this room, some of which are staff members and receive superannuation and the others who don't, and it would be just one way of evening out the playing field.
Do I have an elected member who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question? Councillor McGrath.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As much as I absolutely am in support of us being paid superannuation, I do think it's a bit of an ethical conundrum here because every single one of us have a pecuniary interest in voting on the matter. Would it be possible to make an amendment to actually delegate that decision back to ELT to avoid that?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I understand the question is there a conflict of interest on voting on this? Is that the...
Well, I wasn't really asking a question. I was saying we all have a pecuniary interest.
Yeah, more a point of order.
Yeah.
I'd have to take that question on notice.
The only thing I would add to that, if I may, Mr Mayor, is that my understanding is that it's an entitlement by legislation. Is that correct?
It becomes an entitlement if council votes to pay it, but it's a payment in addition to the councillor fee, but it's not a payment as an employee.
So what you're saying is it's a discretionary decision?
Council can choose to pay superannuation to its councillors or not.
So through you, Mr Mayor, can I ask a very leading question of the Director, which hopefully he can answer? Is it correct, or my understanding is that every year we vote on councillor remuneration, and it's specifically set out in the Local Government Act that there is no conflict of interest when councillors vote on that, and the only way, annually we must pass a resolution dealing with our remuneration. It's the only way to, struggling to phrase the words, but it's the only way to address that matter, and regardless of whether we choose to deliver IPART's recommended pay rise or hold councillor fees flat, we must pass that resolution every year. And on my reading of the notes and LG New South Wales, or the Office of Local Government's advice, that this decision was set up the same way. It's legislated that it's not a declarable interest, and the only way for this matter to be dealt with is for an open resolution of council.
Through you, Mr Mayor, yes, council must resolve to make the superannuation payments. I'm not sure whether that decision could be delegated. I doubt very much it would, but as I said, I would have to take that question on notice. I suspect very strongly that the resolution would have to be carried by council. With regard to the opt-in or opt-out, council either opts in or opts out of superannuation payments, but individual councillors can, per the legislation, right to opt out of the payments if they don't wish to receive them. But if council doesn't resolve to make the payments, no councillors will receive superannuation.
Councillors, you'll also note in your report that it stipulates, as per the advice given by the Office of Local Government, that for the payments to happen, a resolution of council must be passed. So therefore, the only way a resolution of council can be passed is if councillors vote, and that's right across the state of New South Wales. So councillors, I have a mover of the motion, I have a seconder of the motion. Do I have a... So I take it, Councillor McGrath, you've asked a question, not spoken for or against the motion at this point?
That's correct, Mr Mayor, and I'm satisfied with the answer, so thank you.
Councillor Fuller, as a seconder of the motion, do you wish to speak?
No, thanks, Mr Mayor. I think it's all been...
Are there any further questions or comments, councillors, before I put this motion? Well, then I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? I'll call that unanimously supported. Moving on, next item is item 10.2, Outstanding Resolution Register, and I'll hand back to Mr Foreman to detail the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and through you, the Outstanding Resolution Register is presented for the information of the councillors with questions to be directed to the appropriate officer. The recommendation is that the information be received and noted.
Thank you, Mr Foreman. I now call for elected member to move that recommendation to become the motion. Thank you, Councillor McGrath, seconded by Councillor Fuller. Councillor McGrath, as the mover of the motion, do you wish to speak to that motion?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Do I have elected member who'd like to ask a question or speak against the motion? Councillor Fuller, as a second of the motion, do you wish to speak?
No, thanks, Mr Mayor.
Be the case, then I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declare the motion carried. Mr Foreman, thank you for your contribution to our March ordinary meeting of council. Mr Foreman, this being your last actual official ordinary meeting of council after 14 years service, as you've handed in your notice and you'll be leaving us at the end of the month, I'd like to say on behalf of all of the elected members, those returning and those new, thank you for your contribution to not only your department but this whole organisation. You've played a very vital role in the management, the executive team and the direction of council. You've served your community extremely well. We're very sad to see that you're going, but we hope in whatever it is that you do in your next endeavours that you enjoy it thoroughly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's been a pleasure to serve.
Right, councillors, we'll now move on to the next item, which is the Director of Planning and Environmental Services reports. I'll call on Mr Johns to detail his recommendation, starting with the first item, 11.1, request for reallocation of capital works funding for animal impound facility. Thanks, Mr Johns.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and through you, councillors, as you would have read in this report, the purpose of this report is to seek council's approval for the transfer of funding from the Wondabar Reserve fencing project to the construction of the new animal impound facility, as the fence project is now funded pursuant to the Public Spaces Legacy Fund grant received by council.
Thank you, Mr Johns. I'll now call for elected member to move that recommendation to become the motion. Thank you, Councillor Moses, seconded by Councillor Fuller again. Councillor Moses, as the mover of the motion, do you wish to speak to the motion?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor. The motion said it speaks for itself.
Thank you. Do I have an elected member who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question? Councillor Fuller, as a second of the motion, do you wish to speak?
No, I think it's all a great idea. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Just before I put this motion then, councillors, if there's no further debate, I'd like to congratulate the director on the fact that we're actually able to take these funds and reallocate them to another project of our community. It was only made possible because of the diligence of the organisation in being able to achieve the target set by the state government to receive that $2 million. And it's not only that we're seeing that reward in this particular project, but many others. So congratulations to yourself, and please pass that on to your team, Mr Johns. In saying that, I will now put the motion. All in favour? Aye. Against? Declare that motion carried. Next item on the agenda is item 11.2. Council, as you recall, we've had two community members present to us earlier today in relation to this item, membership for the mining and energy related councils. I'll now hand back to Mr Johns to detail his recommendation.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and through you, councillors, this report seeks direction from you in relation to renewing membership of mining and energy related councils for the 22-23 financial year.
Thank you, Mr Johns. Councillors, I'll now call for a motion.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I do have one. That council not renew its membership of the Associated Mining and Energy Related Councils.
Do I have a seconder to that motion? I have a seconder in Councillor O'Keefe. Councillor Hook, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And through you, it is with some reluctance that I bring this motion before Council. And I'd like to acknowledge Greg Lamont and Owen Hasler, great stalwarts of the Energy and Mining Related Council, and Councillor Hasler has been a great contributor. The Energy and Mining Related Council has done a lot in the public space over a number of years, and history will dictate that there's a lot has been done. But I'd like to point out that it's history. It's not what's happening now so much, and in my view, it is not really what's going to happen in the future. I feel that the Energy and Mining Related Councils has lost some direction. I don't think they do have a clear direction of where they're heading in the future. There's a great body of people, and I commend all of them for the effort they're putting in. However, over the last 12 or 18 months, I really see the Energy and Mining Related Councils forums basically going in circles. I also get the feeling that it is not being taken as seriously as it used to in Macquarie Street. We're getting speakers coming forward, not so much ministers, they're sending junior people in or people from the departments. It's not going where it used to. It is costing us a considerable amount of money, and our budget is going to tighten up over the next number of years as we try to recover from COVID, other world crises that are taking place, high energy costs, and approximately, I would suggest $14,000 is actually spent with membership and also with delegates attending the event. It's with a heavy heart, but I believe that until the Energy and Mining Related Councils can give a clear indication of where they're actually heading in the future and show some absolute net benefit, and I think Councillor McGrath was seeking out some answers to that particular question by saying, okay, we have got history here, but where do you plan to go in the future? And I don't believe that there was actually any clear answer in that. So I think at this point, it would be better if we took a breath, we stood back and we had a good look at it to see whether It is an organisation which is going to go places to give us benefit into the future, that it is a possibility to rejoin. I have no doubt that if we make up our mind in a year or two that yes, the direction has changed, that it's a positive direction, then I think that the energy and mining related councils would be happy to for us to rejoin again. But at this particular point, I really cannot see any net benefit to this particular council. Thank you.
I now call for elected member who'd like to speak against the motion. Councillor Luke.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Hook, or Councillor Hook, has attended the last couple, has been one of the delegates for the last couple of years, and has put his name to the reports that have been submitted. And I wonder whether at the end of those reports, after attending those quarterly meetings, it was not raised about the questionable membership. I think that if an organisation isn't doing what you want it to do, I don't think you should actually leave, but you should actually work very hard from within that organisation to see whether it can produce the sort of benefits that you would like to do. So rather than jumping off, seeing whether it will go in the future, I think as this is the first year of a new council, it would make more sense that we renewed our membership for 1 year, appointed delegates who would actually sort of report back specifically with the value for money, 1 or 2 delegates. It doesn't have to be 2 delegates, to keep the cost down if that is indeed an issue, so that we can go forward with a critical view of our membership and reassess that in 12 months' time, and come back and look at this, our membership again in 12 months.
Thank you, Councillor Luke. Councillor O'Keefe is the seconder of the motion. Do you wish to speak?
No, I will, Mr Mayor. I speak without the benefit that Councillor Hook speaks, having been a delegate, and I do note that one of our presenters today certainly indicated that we should take the views of our delegates into account when we are seeking to make a decision on renewing or otherwise of our membership. And granted, former Councillor Hasler has presented passionately in one side of that argument, and Councillor Hook, whom has also been our delegate for the majority or entirety of the last term of council, has presented the opposite. So clearly it's a split decision from our most recent delegates as to where we should go. I have some concerns about our membership of MERC in terms of delivering value for money and what deliverable or what purpose we as a Shire have out of being a member. And one of the concerns I have for the organisation, it's something similar to what Councillor Hook articulated, is that I've noticed and felt in my 5 years on council and looking at a bit of the history, that the organisation does tend to shop for a scope that provides relevance for what's going on. And unfortunately for that, whilst it may keep the association active, it doesn't necessarily move with the times for the council. We're already a member of a great diversity of bodies which provide deeper membership of more councils and more shires and more engagement opportunities, more networking opportunities for our members, and more chances to do a very positive thing of looking over the fence and seeing what's happening elsewhere. To name a few, our mayor has recently been elected the deputy chair of Country Mayors Association. He's the chair of Namoi Unlimited. We're on local government in New South Wales. We attend their conferences. We've just passed resolutions for the Australian Local Government Association. The fact is, we're a council. We're active in all of the bodies that we as a council need to be active in, and we can't possibly spread our time everywhere. The core role of our duties is to address the issues as they arise in our community, and we're doing that. I'm unsure if we can solve the same problems across 20 different organisations and expect to get a different outcome or a different answer. So I think that there comes a point in time where we need to draw a line in the sand and suggest that we need to focus our money and our efforts and our attention and our energy in something that has a deeper breadth of membership and more chance for us to align within our region, being Namoi Unlimited, and with the broad group of regional and rural councils in New South Wales i.e. Country Mayors Association, because ultimately, where Merck sets its charter and sites now, it is, effectively mining, energy related, and that's so all encompassing some of the areas that they go on. It's effectively the issues that face any regional and rural council in New South Wales.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Do I have a Councillor Fuller you'd like to speak?
I'd like to speak against Councillor Hook's motion. I've been around since the mining in the 90s, when we had no mining. We had 1,700 jobs lost here within a month, with two mines closing and an abattoirs that we lost. The mining related councillors, I wasn't around on council then, but I was one of the councillors, one of the people in the community that fought to do something about it. Fought alongside other members in the community. Those areas that we fought against, fought up to make sure that when the mining started, that we were out there to do something about it. I can remember going to Narrabri and fighting when Tony Windsor was the member to keep the fly-in, fly-outs out. So there was some of the mining-related councils' work that was done over a period of time, and I do believe it was an area that we looked at. We also fought for Wallandilly areas as a representative on that committee to do all these things and make the changes that happened over time. Mining rehabilitation, we stood our grounds on several areas. And we also did work to make sure that we got women into the mining areas as well. And I was on that committee at the time that happened. I know that there's mixed feelings about it, but it has served its purpose over the years and it hasn't cost that much money. I know that we're talking about $8,000 a year. I think that what we should be doing is cutting back and not having 3 or 4, 2 or 3 people attend. Put one on and give it 1 year more. 1 year. Try it. I'd hate to think that if something goes wrong in this area that we don't have that there to support it. And I know that we served it with many, many people out of this chambers on that committee to do what we could do for the good of Gunnedah and the whole of our region. So I will be voting against disbanding that committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fuller. We've had 2 speak for, 2 against. It's good debate. Is there any further debate before I ask Councillor Hook if he'd like a right or reply? Councillor Fuller, would you mind turning your microphone? Okay, there's no further debate. Councillor Hook, sorry.
I did, Mr Mayor. I listened to your impassioned speech, Councillor Fuller, and I respect it completely. The only thing I would say is it's not just one association, that council itself can take on that role, and we understand our community best. And I endorse particularly what Councillor O'Keefe said so well, that perhaps there does come a time when a relationship with an association ends, and that doesn't mean we don't expect, well, we do respect what it has achieved over time, but perhaps it is more historical than moving forward. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
There's no further debate. Councillor McGrath, would you like to speak?
I'm sorry, just listening to all of this, and I can't help but wonder whether there's something perhaps that isn't sitting at the surface, because it seems like a really straightforward thing. It's $8,000. We would spend more than that a year on catering us to eat 3 times a day. Like, it's really not that much money. And I appreciate the point you're making, Murray, and you, Councillor Hook, but it really seems to me that when there are such strong historical ties to an organisation, when the area that we live in is in that flux, where we're really sitting and looking at the diversity and looking at the future, why would we choose now to be the moment that we step back? And I appreciate what you said about losing their way, but if there's such strong ties and if there's such strong history, why are we not prepared to step up and be part of finding the way? Like, honestly, it seems like we are being quite cowardly.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. So we've had 3 for, 3 against. I'm going to stop debate there. And Councillor Hook, would you like your right to reply?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I am very glad to hear all the debate, and I respect that, and it's out of genuine passion, and there has been some wonderful work done in the past and history. But this is where it actually stops. I think there comes a time where organisations actually run their course, and they have put a lot in train, and I don't think that there's much further that we can actually go. I'd like to question the fact that we spend more money on our meals in council than the $14,000 plus that we're probably going to spend if we join Merck. I think that money, I still believe that money can be better spent elsewhere at this particular time. If Merck can come up with some really strong sense of direction in the future, if there's further need. But Council is doing very nicely, thank you very much, in its own right. And as Councillor O'Keefe has reiterated, that we belong to some very strong organisations already, and ones which we actually don't have to pay a lot of money for. I do also have some concerns that there's a regional development area, Arana, and there was a proposal that the Arana Opportunity Network, which is actually tied in with New South Wales University, research into the economic impact of automation in mining and the impact it has on the Arana region. Now, Merck itself decided they would become a bronze member of that organisation, which was using the money from its members to be part of that organisation, when really we were supporting an impact study which was only going to benefit one region. And I really can't abide by that, and that's one of the reasons I think it's lost its way. And there's not much more that I can add. It's up to councillors to digest the debate and see which way they want to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hook. Well, councillors, good debate. We've had plenty of debate for and against. Clearly there are differing opinions within the room, so I'm going to put the motion, but I'd like a show of hands to make it easier to see which way the motion is going to go. So you have a motion, and that motion reads that council not renew membership of the Association of Mining and Energy Related Councils. I'm going to put that motion. All in favour? Against? And declare the motion carried. We'll now move on to the next item, which is 11.3, Standard Instrument LEP Agritourism Amendment Order, and I'll hand back to Mr Johns to detail the recommendation.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and through you, councillors, this report recommends that the proposed farm stay accommodation and farm gate premise clauses are incorporated into the Gunnedah LEP, and it also seeks to permit new definitions in agritourism, farm experience and farm gate premises into zones that currently have agriculture as a permissible use. Essentially, the changes allow for increased flexibility and also for opportunities for off-farm income for many of our ratepayers.
Thank you, Mr Johns. Councillors, you have a recommendation before you. I'll call for it. Thank you. Councillor Fuller has moved that recommendation to become a motion and seconded by Councillor O'Keefe. Councillor Fuller, as the mover of the motion, do you wish to speak?
I just think it's a very good idea, and I think we'll all benefit by it. Thank you.
I'll now give an opportunity for an elected member who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I'll just ask the officer responsible if he thinks that we'll get an explosion in newly permissible seaports and other mooring facilities in some of the zones.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and Councillor O'Keefe, thanks for the question. They are permissible, so you never know.
Thank you for indulging that, Mr Johns. Mr Mayor, I know you're about to offer me the chance to speak as the seconder. I just want to also make the point that I'm very excited that any microbreweries that might open in our shire will no longer be discriminated against and won't have to be referred to as a cellar door.
If there's any educated debate, I'd like to hear it, councillors, before I put this motion. If there's no further debate, I'd like to put this motion. All in favour? Against? Declare the motion carried. Moving on, next item 11.4, Employment Zone Reform, and I'll hand back to Mr Johns to detail the recommendation.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and through you, councillors, this report seeks endorsement to publicly exhibit the employment zone transition detail that's been prepared for the Gunnedah LEP in accordance with the Standard Instrument Order 2006 that has been amended by the New South Wales DPI. It essentially sees existing commercial industrial zones changed to new employment zones and supply zones, and would also see a public exhibition of that, so we can seek the position of the community in relation to that.
Thank you, Mr Johns. I'll now call for elected member to move the recommendation to become the motion. Thank you, Councillor MacArthur, and seconded by Councillor McGrath. It's all the M's. I would now like to give you the opportunity to speak to the motion. Thank you, Councillor MacArthur.
No, that's not necessary. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Do I have an elected member who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question? Councillor McGrath, as a second to the motion, do you wish to speak to the motion?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Well, with no debate, it all must be very clear in the report. I'm going to put the motion. All in favour? Against? Declare that motion carried. Thank you, Mr Johns, for your contribution to the ordinary meeting for March. We'll now move on to item number 12, which is the Director of Infrastructure Services reports, and I'll call on the Director, holding two responsible areas, being the Acting General Manager and the Director tonight, Mr Bartlett, to detail his recommendations, starting with the first one, 12.1, Country Women's Association 100-year centenary plaques.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and through you, the purpose of this report is to seek council approval to place the plaque design submitted by the CWA on public exhibition for a period of 21 days and approve its installation in the locations described in the report if no submissions are received.
Thank you, Mr Bartlett. I'll call for, thank you, Councillor Fuller has moved that motion and seconded by Councillor Hook. Councillor Fuller, as the mover of the motion, do you wish to speak to it?
No, I think everything's fine with that one, thank you, and I'm looking forward to seeing that happen.
Thank you. Do I have an elected member who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question? Councillor Hook is seconded to the motion. Do you wish to speak to the motion?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Well, then I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Declare the motion carried unanimously. Next item is 12.2, waiving of private works fees for the Gunnedah Motorcycle Club, and I'll hand back to Mr Bartlett to detail that recommendation.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and through you, the purpose of this report is to seek council approval to waive the private works hire fees on plant and equipment to assist the Gunnedah Motorcycle Club following a formal request from the club.
Thank you, Mr Bartlett. I'll now call for elected member to move that recommendation. Councillor Moses, seconded by Councillor MacArthur. Councillor Moses, as a mover of the motion, do you wish to speak to the motion?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Well behaved. Do I have an elected member who'd like to speak against the motion or ask a question?
I'd just like
Councillor Hoddle.
Ask a question indirectly, Mr Mayor. I support this, but somewhat question it. There are many organisations that want to hire gear, borrow gear, want assistance from council, and I don't think we're very clear where council stands on this. Everything seems to be up to the council meeting. Someone comes up with another proposal, can we help them? Here we've got another one that involves lending equipment and all the issues of liability for people that operate them, and Mr Dale said that the people that will operate them will be people that are experienced to do that, and the equipment won't be damaged. It does leave things it's a very open arrangement, and I trust Mr Dow when he uses the equipment, if he does need it for additional hours other than the 8 hours he's estimated, will advise council of that, and he'll be charged the appropriately hourly rate for the equipment. I mean, we'd all love to borrow the council grader, and this is the way council used to work, that if you had someone around that could help you out years ago, they'd bring the grader in and you give them a carton of beer. But those days are over. We have to be very very definite about how we operate this, and I trust that the department that's running this will make sure that the equipment is looked after well and the hours are exactly right. Thank you for the opportunity for the comment.
Thank you, Councillor Hoddle. Seconded to the motion was Councillor MacArthur. Do you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would just acknowledge that the members of the club are ensuring there are competent volunteers. They've met council halfway and they're going to pay for any damage done if that's the case, and also fuel, which, given this day and age, is a significant contribution. So, thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point about the fuel, and I think that we should stipulate that the equipment leaves the depot full of fuel and it's to be returned full of fuel. Is that there? Yeah, right. Yeah.
Councillor Hoddle, could I ask that you turn your microphone off when not speaking, please? Now I'd like to invite an elected member if further questions or comments, or an elected member who'd like to speak against the motion. Councillor Luke.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a question from the Director. Is fuel usually part of that hourly hiring fee?
Thank you, Councillor Luke, for the question, and through you, Mr Mayor. No, fuel is not normally part of that hourly hire fee. It is on top.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions or comments, councillors, before I put the motion? I may just ask one question of the Director beforehand, if I may. How often would we actually participate in something similar to this, where we're hiring our equipment out to the general public?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, for the question, and through you. It's an unusual type of request. Generally, the request would be for council to undertake private works on behalf of the user group, and that the request would generally be for the private works fees to be waived. The Gunnedah Motorcycle Club have recognised that that type of request is they're looking for a partnership with council in order to minimise the cost both to the club and also to council, and that's the reason why they've proposed this in the way that they have.
Thank you, Mr Bartlett. Councillors, I'd now like to put this motion. All in favour? Aye. Against? Declare the motion carried. Moving on, item 12.3, Ryan Road, Carroll, Creek Crossing Upgrade Proposal. I'll hand back to Mr Bartlett to detail that recommendation.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and through you. The purpose of this report is to advise council of the current situation at the Gully Crossing on Ryan Road, Carroll. An infrastructure upgrade opportunity exists to install a box culvert drainage structure with concrete causeway top and sealed road approaches to address issues for heavy vehicle access to properties on Ryan Road, Carroll. This will restore the level of previously available accessibility to 3 rural properties, including 1 dwelling. The level of accessibility has been reduced as a result of natural changes to the watercourse over time through erosion. Landowners are currently only able to access these properties in light vehicles and smaller heavy vehicles.
Thank you, Mr Bartlett. I'll call for an elected member to move that recommendation. Thank you, Councillor Hook, seconded by Councillor Fuller. Councillor Hook, as a mover of the motion, who's to speak to it?
I think it'd just be a great outcome for the people in that region. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
I'll now call for elected member who would like to ask a question or speak against the motion. Councillor McGrath.
I'm just a question, sorry, not speaking against. I'm just curious about the significance of that particular road. Like, were there no other projects suitable for that funding program, or why? Like, it's one road, 3 properties. It seems like it wouldn't impact as many people as some of the other roads in the Shire.
The reason, through you, Mr Mayor, and thank you for the question, Councillor McGrath. In terms of the level of access, the residents have experienced a reduction in the level of service that used to exist there. So they used to be able to get larger heavy vehicles in, and they can no longer do that as a result of erosion over time in that waterway. This is a way to minimise the additional cost to council associated with restoring that access and take advantage of a grant funding opportunity in order to achieve that outcome.
Thank you.
Councillor Fuller, is the second to the motion. Do you wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Are there any further questions or elected member to speak against the motion? Councillor Hoddle? No, against. I've had 2 for and 1 question.
Yeah, I do have a question, Mr Mayor, of the Director. Thank you. Is then it's a co-contribution of $122,000 for, did you say 3 residents accessing that road, first of all, and secondly, is there no alternative for those 3 residents to?
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy, for the question. Yes, that's correct. There are 3 properties serviced by this road, and no, there are no other alternative access options.
Thank you, Mr Bartlett. Just before I put this motion, I'll just clarify that if the application under the New South Wales Government Fixing Local Roads grant is not successful, then this roadworks will not happen, and the $122,000 will go back into consolidated revenue, correct?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, for the question. If the grant application is unsuccessful, a report will be brought back to Council in order for Council to make a determination on where those funds would be spent.
So, councillors, we've had debate for and against. I'd now like to put the motion. All in favour? Against? Therefore carried. Well, moving right along. Next item, 12.4, which is review of water, drought and demand management plans. I'll hand back to Mr Bartlett to detail the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and through you, the purpose of this report is to seek Council endorsement of the revised Gunnedah water supply, drought and demand management plans, and to update the watering times in the Gunnedah Shire water restriction policy to reflect the community survey results.
Thank you, Mr Bartlett. I'll now call for elected member who'd like to move the recommendation. Thank you, Councillor Hook, seconded by Councillor Hoddle. Councillor Hook has moved the motion. Do you wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
I'll now call an elected member who'd like to ask a question or speak against the motion.
I'd love to ask a question, Mr Mayor. Through you, I just want to clarify that I've read the revised water supply and drought management demand plans correctly, and a point I want to note is that in the way I've read the plans, in the last drought we experienced in Gunnedah, where we moved to the first level of water restrictions in the back half of 2019, we actually did not reach what is to become the new trigger. Is that correct? So in other words, we would have remained for the entirety of the last drought completely devoid of water restrictions.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe, for the question, and through you, Mr Mayor. That statement is correct. Council did not meet the trigger to implement water restrictions had not been yet met in that scenario, and that trigger would also not be met under the revised drought and demand management plans. It was a proactive decision of Council to enter restrictions.
Councillor Hoddle, as a seconder of the motion, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I would like to congratulate the department on putting together some really useful information there. There are a couple of issues on it though. On page 127 would be, you've got Wean Road as one pump. Well, have you lumped in 5 pumps into one? Is that what you've done?
Thank you, Councillor Hoddle, for the question, and through you, Mr Mayor, I'll need to take that question on notice and provide a response to a future council meeting, or get that information to councillors before the next meeting.
Thanks for that. I assume that's what you've done because that's what the figures look like. But I'd like to congratulate you on putting together and look forward to to working on this further, because it's the first time we've really sat down and acknowledged that the water is finite, and we've got to manage it very, very carefully. And I think that's what you're attempting to do. And the hours things make sense, that people are watering in the evening. So I commend Council to adopt the resolution.
Thank you, Councillor Hoddle. I'll now call for any further questions, comments, or elected member to speak against the motion before I put the motion. There are no. I've had one question from you, Councillor O'Keefe, but I'll allow another.
It's not really a question, it's a comment. You did offer that. I just want to make a comment. I don't think it was Councillor Hoddle's intention, but just for the benefit of the organisation and those that were here last term, it's certainly not the first time we've considered the finite nature of the resource. And I guess I asked my question to tease out, not for the first time, just how fortunate a position we are in as a shire with water, and would back up and agree with Councillor Hoddle's sentiments that we are blessed with such easy access to such a precious resource, and the proactive nature of the organisation and us as an elected body to make sure we safeguard that and maximise the longevity of our competitive advantage compared with Shelbyville to the east is well contended for all.
Thank you, councillors. I think the debate's reached a pinnacle, and it's time to put the motion, so I will. All in favour? Against? Declare the motion carried. Moving right along, and thank you, Mr Bartlett, for your contribution. Item 13, 14 and 15, there are no business for our March meeting. So we now come to a time of what we would normally go into closed meeting to determine items of a confidential nature. So before we do so, I'd like to ask all of those in attendance, if they could please leave the chambers, thank you, and we'll be suspending our online presence during this point in time as we debate our closed items. But firstly, I would like to ask, are there reasons why anyone believes this item should not be determined in closed council? No? Okay. Ms Markey, can you please confirm that we've suspended our online meeting? I'm about to call for that, but before I do,